Welcome to the Halava Fantasy Football League. This is the weekly recap. This is week 9. So let's get into it. Today's drink for the day is this is a Rusty Nail. A Rusty Nail is Scotch whiskey with a liqueur called Drambuie, and there's a lemon twist in it. Pretty simple drink. I was trying to go for something simple so I can hurry up and finish this. It's an okay drink. It's a good cocktail. Not the best. There are actually much more sophisticated ones and ones that I like a lot more. Some that are simpler that I like better. I think it's kind of on the sweet side for me. Even when I dial down the Drambuie, which is a pretty sweet cocktail in and of itself. Added a little bit of something with a little bit more peat so I could kind of cut the sweetness with some smoke, but still sweet. All right, let's get into the week. It was an interesting week in terms of football. There was a Germany game that was interesting. There was a couple really big headline matchups, and also a lot of kind of low scores, I would say. I think if you look across the board, I had an unusually low score, but there's a good reason for that. But like you see, Morgan had under 80, Darren had about 8. Just a few handful of under 100, and middle score. Oh, these is interesting. Look how close these scores are. 112.64, 112.48, 112.38. Imagine those matchups. That would have been pretty wild. But it was a week where the matchups just didn't really jive, and it didn't make it too interesting. Starting off with me versus Richie. This was a heavy bye week for me. If you take a look at the bench, Detroit was on bye, and then my team might as well be the Lions anyway. But other than that, it was very underwhelming for the guys that I was able to put in place. And I feel sorry for Richie because it was a week where he have the highest score of the week. He did, just barely. So it would have been an amazing match if he went up against Aaron, but it was kind of like a wasted performance against me. I had a horror. I think this is gonna be the lowest score of the year unless anybody else wants to tank. I really have nothing to mention. I was the one who picked up Will Levis, but he did okay football wise, but fantasy wise, nothing there. The most notable one for me is probably George Pickens, who had 2 catches for -1 receiving yard. At least he had a positive score for me. It was only 0.9, but I think the big news is about him like deleting all his ties to Pittsburgh on his social media and saying free me. The timing is kind of a little bit suspect. You could have complained last week before the trade deadline. Can't really do anything for you now, and I don't know how this helps you, so tough for him. Breece Hall was the subject of a tough Monday Night Football game where they were playing from behind, so he couldn't do much. I mean, he did pretty decently. Tyler Algier is my best performer with a touchdown, and everyone else is. I picked up Trey McBride. His breakout game was last week. This is more in line with what tight ends have been doing. For Richie, this was an interesting one. Lamar Jackson. This is the one where fantasy doesn't match life, because in this case, Lamar Jackson was flawless. He did exactly what he needed to do in this blowout win of Seattle, but for fantasy, it's kind of mediocre. CeeDee Lamb is your best performer of the day. Actually, it's not. Your best performer of the day is your Cleveland defense, who pitched the shutout of Arizona, 27-0, who no longer have Dobbs. They decided to start Clayton Tune, traded away Dobbs. Murray wasn't ready yet, and so your defense pitched a shutout, had 2 sacks and an interception, 24.8. Your second highest performer is CeeDee Lamb, who had 191 receiving yards, 11 receptions, and 1 fumble loss. A touchdown would have helped, like, make him like the top scorer of the week, but not complaining for you, obviously, because he had a huge game. On the other side of the Pittsburgh receiving core is Deontay Johnson, who ever since he has been back has been a clear-cut number 1. He got his first touchdown in like a crazy amount of days. Chuba Hubbard had a decent game for you. Bijan had a good game, buoyed by a nice touchdown. And then you are the recipient of Dalton Kincaid the beneficiary of him just like finally living up to his draft capital. You know, he's a first round tight end, first tight end off the board, and he's um, trying to compete and get back with Sam Laporta for top tight end, rookie tight ends. Stephon Diggs had a solid game. He also was able to get a nice touchdown. And then off of your bench, Joe Mixon had a really good game as well. He would have been better to start over Chuba Hubbard, but I don't know. In general, we'll talk a little bit more about the beneficiaries of the Cincinnati weapons with the resurgence of Burrow, but he's one of them. So congrats to Richie for totally destroying me. We have both simultaneously the top score of the week and the worst score of the week, and this is the worst score of the season. But as you can see, it was a scheduled loss for me. I'm sorry, Richie, that you wasted you wasted it against me. Next up, we have Eric versus Morgan. Here's another blowout. Not quite to that proportion, but a blowout nonetheless. Dak Prescott showed out and was amazing in this hard-fought battle against Philly. They were trying so hard and they had so many chances to knock Philly off, but they just couldn't get over the edge. But regarding fantasy, you did a great job. 374 passing yards, 3 passing touchdowns, 29 completions. They had that one pass to the tight end, Dallas Goddard, that just did not count. That one kind of hurt, but I mean, in terms of them winning, that probably would have helped you too. But regardless, you dominated. T. Higgins was balling out. He had the T. Higgins game that they were hoping for, because outside of the second week, he has been pretty sad. So good game by him. McLaurin had 73 receiving yards, 5 receptions. Derrick Henry had a pretty solid game in a losing effort to Pittsburgh. 75 rushing yards and a touchdown. And he even had 27 receiving yards. Najee Harris had one of his better games of the year. 69 rushing yards and a touchdown. 16 carries too. So he finally has this is actually his best game of the year. Just doing a little bit better than when they played the Rams. You got solid tight end play from Taysom Hill, who had a receiving touchdown, passing touchdown, 52 rushing yards. Does that sound like a tight end to you? I don't know. That's just the designation that is given to Taysom Hill. It's weird, but in terms of fantasy, that is a gold mine, because all of those, he might as well be a super flex player. Like, you can put him at any spot, but for him, he's just called a tight end. I mean, it helps too, because literally there are like 4 super amazing tight ends in the league right now. Everyone else is mid to trash. Taysom Hill is the outlier who can do something like this from time to time. You flexed in AJ Jones. That was the winning move. He had 73 rushing yards and a touchdown. And then not much from your kicker or your defense. I mean, that's pretty sad. 1.7 from the Buffalo D. Off the bench, well, the one most notable is Jaylen Warren, who was pretty good. He's kind of like the Tony Pollard to the Ezekiel Elliott, but he had a pretty solid game. 88 rushing yards, but he sits on your bench. Maybe swapping these things around, maybe putting Jones at the running back spot and then putting Warren at the flex would help. But it doesn't matter, because you beat Morgan, who just didn't have that great of a game. The best games come from Love, Njoku. That's a pretty good tight end score. And Jahan Dotson. Your best player was Dobbs, who is not an Arizona quarterback. He is now a Minnesota quarterback. He has a great and interesting story. I don't know if he's going to be able to repeat that, but I mean, he's like fresh out of Arizona. He doesn't know the playbook. He doesn't know the players' names on his team, but he just balls out. And he's able to get you 2 passing touchdowns, 158 passing yards, and he's able to run all over the place with 66 yards. So amazing game by him. Underwhelming scores, which we do not expect. This is what we were talking about, right? A lot of underwhelming scores. Unfortunately for Morgan, he had Jamar Chase, Thielen, Kenneth Walker, Alvin Kamara, all guys who you expect to ball out. This just was not their week. And then because of that, Morgan is the loser. Next up, we have Darren versus Jeremy. Not a good day for Darren because Godwin only had 2 catches for 16 yards. Lockett only had 3 catches for 32 yards. That Ravens D just put the clamps on Seattle. Justice Hill, he had a good snap share, 13 rushes, only 40 yards, but that doesn't translate for fantasy points. And then bad from the D, bad for the kicker. Boyd was okay, but your best players was Patrick Mahomes, who didn't do much, but they did enough just to win in Germany, and Taylor, who had one of his better games. I think this might be his best game of the year. Is it? No, not quite, but a solid game for Taylor. And then Ferguson was your best player. I mean, because he's blowing expectation out of the water with 91 receiving yards and a touchdown. Off the bench, not much you could have swapped out. And then, but for Jeremy, he wins because Josh Allen goes Josh Allen mode at the end of the game, and then was able to get these late points, trying to mount a comeback. The only problem is, see, Josh Allen can do this. He wakes up at the end of the game when they're in trouble and can win against anybody. The problem is they tried to do it against Cincinnati, who is just too good. They're too good right now. Tyreek Hill had a down game, and then you could see this early in that early Germany game when Miami was shut out the first half. Kansas City had the perfect game plan, eating up clock, keeping the ball out of the offense's hands, and then because of that, the offense suffers for Miami. Miami is a gold mine for fantasy, but whatever Kansas City did really, really hurt the Miami fantasy players. And then it's obvious. Is this the worst score for Tyreek Hill for the year? Not quite. I guess Buffalo shut him down even more, but that goes to show that, you know, against these really, really powerhouse teams, Miami doesn't quite get there. I guess in terms of the schedule, what they have going forward, Vegas, Jersey, Washington, Tennessee. Outside of these last 2 games, you expect Tyreek Hill to just continue to ball out. So this is one of those where it's tough, but at least you were able to get the win. Swift had an okay game. Cole Kmet had one of your better games outside of Allen. And then off the bench, nothing really much to mention. Brownsville Jets versus broken record. So Mike continues his dominance to the league, able to get a good matchup, knocking off Bradley to his 7th loss. Jalen Hurts, more Philadelphia dominant. Like the fact that they have to play some of these more competitive games helps them to continue to just have to play through to the end of the game. In this case, for Jalen Hurts, he was able to have 207 passing yards and a rushing touchdown and 2 passing touchdowns. So that really helps carry your team. Devontae Smith, much better scores as of late. For the past few weeks, he's performed better. He has a touchdown, 51 receiving yards. DJ Moore had a come down, only 44 receiving yards and some negative points from a fumble lost. Saquon Barkley, he's still going to continue to be fantasy relevant, but the Giants have been hurt by the fact that they've lost Daniel Jones to a ACL injury. So he's out for the year. And I don't know, it's going to be hard for Barkley because if they're going to continue with, what's his name, the quarterback they have now who's pretty awful. That could go one of two ways. You just load up on Barkley and have him just run, or he's going to be hurt by the fact that he has no help. Gus Edwards had a solid day, taking a lot of the points from Lamar Jackson. He had 2 rushing touchdowns. TJ Hawkinson had a solid game, 69 receiving yards and 7 catches. Not much from Henderson, and not much from Bass. A decent game from your defense. And then, like, for Brad, solid play from Burrow, who had a really good game. I was saying, like, to me, Burrow is playing the best quarterback in the league right now. I mean, you can say something about some of the others and the other mainstays, but ever since his ankle has been healthy, use the eye test and watch the games. He has been picking defenses apart. He picked apart San Francisco last week. He picked apart Buffalo this week. And so those defenses are no slouch. So, I don't know. To me, Burrow has been pretty amazing. There have been others who have been decent, like Lamar Jackson, and then what's his name had an amazing game. We'll get to him later, but CJ Stroud had an amazing game. We'll get to him. But to me, Burrow has been playing, at least within the last 3-4 games, he has been amazing. Let me just make sure I'm saying that right. Yeah, the last 3-4 games, fantasy wise, it has been reflective of it. The first 3 weeks, not so good. For the rest of your team, not much to say. Brian Robinson, James Cook, Addison, McPherson, and your Pittsburgh D, not so much. And then okay games from Garrett Wilson, Myers, and a really good game from Andrews. Just not enough to close the gap and give Mike a scare. Off of your bench, you actually had a decent performance from Nico Collins. And speaking of CJ Stroud, he was one of the beneficiaries, but there were some others that really benefited from that guy's game. Next up, we howl at just in time. I think you need to change your name, Mike, because Howl is no longer with you. Howl is with Gary, and Howl helped Gary beat you. So maybe it's time to change that name. Carr had a okay game, 211 passing yards, 2 passing touchdowns. Devontae Adams had a fantasy not that relevant game, but at least they're happy because they fired. We talked about that, right? And we said I said they should fire Josh McDaniels, and lo and behold, they did. And they're much happier. And even though Adams doesn't really perform fantasy wise or statistics wise, they're much happier. Former Raider Amari Cooper had an amazing game. Had 1 touchdown, 139 receiving yards, and 5 catches. Stevenson had an amazing game for you. 87 rushing yards and a touchdown. Zach Moss had a bad game. Dallas Goedert, sad for Dallas Goedert because despite him giving you 50 receiving yards, I think he broke his arm. That was a painful look. Joshua Kelly, not much there, but they didn't need much. Their defense actually won this game for them, to me. Nick Folk had an amazing kicking game for you, 120 field goal yards. Yeah, so that's how the field goals are scored, is like the yardage. The distance of those field goals will give you more points. The Baltimore D had an amazing game too, but not enough for you to beat Gary, because Gary had Sam Howell help him. Jalen Waddle had a game. Douglas, interesting start, didn't do much, but Josh Jacobs balled out. He was one of the beneficiaries of, I guess, the McDaniel firing. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, 98 rushing yards, 26 carries. Those are old school bell cow numbers, so that's amazing. So hopefully, if you can get that going forward, Gary's going to be a force to be reckoned with, because that is like RB1 type of stats. Jacoby Ford had a solid game for you. 44 rushing yards and a lot of receiving yards. Travis Kelce, nothing much home to write about, but they didn't. Kareem Hunt, decent game. And an even better kicking game from Carlson, your Vegas kicker. 111 field goal yards, 3 extra points, and 2 field goals from 40 to 49 yards. And your last Los Angeles Chargers D was the star of the show here. 8 sacks and a touchdown shutout. They gave up 2 field goals and they recovered 3 fumbles. All those turnovers. That was pretty amazing for you. Off the bench for you guys, Deshaun Watson was your better tight end today. You have 2 guys on IR. And then for Gary, Madison had a really strong game. Like maybe he is benefiting from the new dot. Nakua has been down. This is a smart benching because they're that quarterback that they played because Stafford out was awful. So that's a smart benching. Cam Akers, you're gonna have to drop him because unfortunately for Cam, he tore his Achilles again. Tough break for him, man. He already had an Achilles injury for the Rams, but he goes to Minnesota and tears his Achilles shortly after Cousins tears his Achilles. So I don't know what's going on with Minnesota, but tough break for him. And then the last game we have James versus Aaron, another blowout. Unfortunately for James, he had a donut for Michael Thomas. I don't know if he even played. Justin Herbert, despite the win, that Jets D is pretty solid, holding him like 10 points below his projected. Cooper Kupp, again, we just talked about how without Stafford, their stock is really, really down. Rashad White is your best player. He had 2 rushing touchdowns, 73 rushing yards. AJ Dillon, meh. Kyle Pitts actually had a decent game by his standards. AJ Brown, solid game as well. Group, an okay kicking game, and then your Tampa Bay D, not so much. Off the bench, Tunka Viola played Herbert, and Gibson had a decent game. But Aaron was the beneficiary of a amazing game by CJ Stroud. I think just on this game alone, on week 9, CJ Stroud has won rookie. He had 5 passing touchdowns, 400 passing yards, 30 completions. He's broken all kinds of records with a performance like this. And so, like what we had from Justin Fields, another Ohio quarterback, Aaron has been the beneficiary of CJ Stroud. So, bravo to CJ Stroud. He has had an amazing game. Chris Olave has also had a nice bounce back. He had a touchdown. Mike Evans had an okay game, 87 receiving yards. Eckler balled out again, maybe probably vulturing some of the points from Herbert. 2 rushing touchdowns. Pollard has been okay, 51 rushing yards, 3 receiving yards. Logan Thomas was okay. Michael Pittman, an okay game. Justin Tucker had a really good game, 113 field goal yards, getting him up there for a kicker score. And your Kansas City D pretty solid. Nothing much to mention about your bench. So good job by Aaron. Too bad you couldn't have played someone else and taken advantage of that. You would have beaten anybody else in the league except for Richie this week. Anyway, that's the week recap. In terms of the league leaders, quickly go look through them. Top quarterback is Josh Allen again. Once he does those like end of the game heroics, really boosts his score. Overtakes Jalen Hurts. Look at all these buys though, right? Jalen Hurts is on bye, Mahomes is on bye, Tua is on bye. Those are some top quarterbacks on bye. That's gonna sway some games this week. Let's see, CJ Stroud moving up the boards. Unfortunately for Kirk Cousins, he's on IR. Wide receiver Tyreek Hill also going on bye. AJ Brown, that's the top 2 receivers on bye this week. But they're 1 and 2. And that matches real life as well. Stephon Diggs there being 3rd. Keenan Allen. We didn't talk about him, but he has been amazing. I don't know if you started him, Jeremy. Let's take a look. Yeah, you did start Keenan Allen. But even though he didn't do that much this week, he has been solid. And he broke the 10,000 yard mark. And I don't know if he's 2nd or 1st in Chargers history, but when you have you just have to applaud a receiver who has longevity, any football player for that matter. And so that's Keenan Allen. So he's going to probably help Jeremy to a long playoff run and possibly a championship. CeeDee Lamb balled out. This is enough to move him up here. And then let's take a look at running back. McCaffrey is still head and shoulders above everyone. Mostert is on bye. Etienne has been solid. Jacobs is kind of moving up again. So good for him. Zach Moss, solid game, even though he's splitting carries with Tyler now. Anybody else of note? Yeah. And then lastly, tight end. Kelsey, tight end 1. Mark Andrews, tight end 2. TJ Hawkinson, tight end 3. Sam Laporta, tight end 4. Although Cole Kmet had a solid, amazing game, enough to get him right up there into that top 5 position. I think the problem is just like too up and down, right? That's probably why. Like, if he's gonna give you 1.9 and not play a game and 3.2, that makes him. That's where the tier separates between Laporta, Hawkinson, Andrews, and Kelsey. Anyway, that's the update with everything. So, in terms of news, next week, I'm gonna go actually watch a real game. So, we're headed down to LA. We're gonna watch the Chargers and the Lions at SoFi. So that's gonna be pretty exciting. So that's this Sunday. So looking forward to that. So look forward to next week's recap, because I don't know if we're gonna do it from LA or when we get back home, but that's gonna be a lot of fun. So that'll be like our first real NFL football game though, like in season real football game. So that'll be pretty exciting. But that's all we got. So we'll talk to you later. Say bye.